Okay, so for those of you who know me for a while, I'm venturing out of my comfortable market area onto the farm. But you'll see I don't really do anything with like farm level data the way my colleagues have. And I basically am talking about a preliminary results from a research project that I have ongoing that explores the organic and conventional yield gap. Now, I'm going to say outright, I am not really sure that studying yields is like the correct thing to do. However, everyone seems to do it, and I think a lot of that is born out of agriculture's desire to like increase on-farm productivity. So I feel like, well, people are going to ask the question, so let's take a look and see what we can say about it. And so the current state of the knowledge, and I think everyone in the room knows this, the long-term cropping system trials in the US show that organic farms perform as well as conventional farms, in their university settings in terms of yields and productivity. The European research, I think, can be a little bit different, and I will just bring your attention to this meta-analysis paper that was I think in either Nature or Science and came out a few years ago. And these authors looked at 66 studies, and they basically said, based upon their analysis, that in the developed world, the yields of organic are about 20% less than the yields for conventional. So, I think one big flaw of that study, and I think they actually did a really nice job, but one big flaw is they do lump all the developed countries together. And one thing, if you look at the conventional productivity on European farms, it is much greater than the productivity on US farms in terms of yield per acre. So I just question whether we want to put all of those together and make blanket statements about yields. And then the last bit of studies that are kind of broader and more comprehensive are these ARMS studies, the Agricultural Resource Management Survey. Most of the work has been done by Bill McBride and Kathy Green, not McGreen. That was funny. And if you look at their analysis of dairy, soybeans, and wheat, they show really when you look at the farm level outside of a cropping system that the farms are less productive, but many of the farms make more money because of the higher, the organic premiums. So that brings me to this recent data set that NASS has done as a tack onto the Census of Agriculture, which has been this effort to do a survey of, or really a census of all organic farmers. So we have data from 2008 and 2011. And so 2008 kind of was a follow-on to the 2007 Census of Agriculture, and 2011 obviously was a year earlier. And now we have the 2014 census is out in the field right now. And so part of this really is because the Risk Management Agency really needs to understand these yield differentials and maybe price differentials. And so I do think that they funded at least part of this. And so if you take a look at the data, for 2011, they really cut back the number of questions that they asked, and they took out, really most of the interesting questions from my perspective. And then in 2014, they added a lot of these questions back, but they added some more questions. And so one striking one is they ask farmers, have you had problems with GM contamination of your crops? And then they ask to report the 3 incidences and what crop it was, when it happened, and what was the dollar cost to you. So, I think these are broader sets of data that don't really give farm level analyses that Tim and Tom have done, but they do give us a sense overall of what's going on. Now, I can tell you all of the reasons why I think census data is flawed and why there are limitations to this type of study. And so the first obvious one, especially in this case, because I'm wanting to look at yields of organic farms and comparing them to yields of conventional farms, we don't even have data from the same year, right? Because we have 2007 and 2008 and then 2011 and 2012. But I forge ahead anyway because, whatever, what can I do? And then the other problem is you really, without understanding the specific farm, you really can't tell if the farm that reports organic production has been farming for 5 years or has been farming for 3 years or has been farming for 10 years. So as we know that really makes a difference, that the longer a farm is successfully farming organically, the higher we expect the yields to be. But again, I think you could probably go into maybe the microdata if NAS would give you access. But even when I worked for ERS, I have to tell you, you basically had to it was hard even for me to get access at that point in time. So even though they say they're open to letting people use it, I don't really know how, maybe you give them your first child or something. Okay, so I was lucky enough to hire a student to go through all of the data and aggregate things for me, because that takes months and months of time. So I did not include any dairy or any livestock farms, just because they have their own set of issues. So I stuck to field crops, fruit and vegetable crops, and I basically calculated yields, just output per acre by state, for conventional and organic. And so I just want to share some highlights of what I found. And so some of the things are things you know. So basically this map shows where these farms are located. And so the darker colors show a higher concentration of farms. So I think they're in places, that we expect. So this is one of my big questions. So basically what I did for this, it's not a descriptive title. So I'm really interested in understanding if regions that have a lot of organic farms are more diversified in the types of products they grow. So basically I took for each state the number of different organic products grown in that state, and then I looked at the number of different conventional products grown in that state, and then I just divided them. So if it's greater than 1, that means that there are more organic products compared to conventional products. And so I know that we all have questions about on-farm diversity and regional diversification for organic farms, and the organic regulation really doesn't speak to any of those, but I do think for people who are interested in promoting regional food systems, you'd hope that organic farms were at least taking you there. That's just, the fantasy part of my life. So you can see, and again, it's not super surprising, the Northeast has a more diversification, and there are just a few pockets, and then the traditional agriculture regions like California has less diversification. Again, that is not so surprising because so many things are grown in California anyway. And then, the Southeast has not a lot of agriculture, and certainly not a lot of organic agriculture. Okay, 5 already? Jeez, okay, so time flies when I'm in have the stage. Okay, so I just want to show a couple of findings. So I broke down the crops to look at in which cases does organic outperform conventional in terms of yield per acre. And so we have a few, millet, prunes, dates, watermelons, and raspberries in 1 year. So this is just going to be some boring charts and numbers, okay? Some crops where the yields were stable over time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the yield comparisons are so great. And so those... Is this organic to conventional also? Yeah, these are all organic to conventional, yeah. And so here are some crops: lettuce, peppers, dry beans, oats. I can send you this if you're interested in looking. The darker blue, sorry, they're 2 different years. The darker blue here is 2008, and the lighter blue is 2011. Sorry.
It's all organic relative to conventional.
Right, it's organic. Right. It's the organic yield divided by the conventional. Right.
So if it's over 100, organic yield's higher. If it's under 100,
it's lower.
It's lower.
Right. Okay, I'll send it to you, Marty, because I can see you're very intrigued. And then I looked at where there was a lot of variation from year to year. So basically it means that some years the organic did a lot better, and in the next year it did a lot worse, or the other case. So year effect, right.
Unfortunately, within a year,
exactly.
It's not the same crop.
Right. No, I understand that. Yeah. Right, but it also shows that you do have some crops where they're pretty stable and some crops where they're not. Right, you have to keep that in mind. I'm aware of that. So then I thought, well, one problem is I was looking at national averages. So let's just look at soybeans by state for 1 year period, which are 2 different years, as was pointed out. And so the national average, the organic yield is 78% of the conventional yield. And then so in these few states, South Dakota, Missouri, Kansas, and Illinois, the yield is greater than the national average. And then for all of those other states, that's less than it. So what I picked are, these are the states that grow both organic and conventional soybeans. So some states that grow one or not the other are not up here, because then you can't calculate a comparison, right? So, all right, I did a back of the envelope calculation. And so I basically said, let's take the yields, the organic yields in 2011 for field crops, fruits and vegetables, all of the crops in my study. And then let's see how much was produced in 2012 for all of these commodities in the United States. So I was just kind of curious, like, suppose we were going to produce all of that under organic production systems given our current yields. So that would imply that we would need an additional 59 million acres. But I still really think, what really is the right question that we should be asking here? And should we be looking at farm profitability or farm viability? And then how do we measure in food provision in that context? So basically, this was really very preliminary. So I am trying to use more sophisticated methods to try to account for these problems, like the year differentials, the age differentials. But I have to tell you, it is a nightmare, but I am confident that in a couple of years, you will help. Okay, all right, so, okay, I'm done.